My father never failed to punish me for every small mistake, then expected to walk me down the aisle, so I let him watch the man who actually raised me do it instead. My father kept count of every mistake I ever made, and he made me pay for all of them. A spilled glass at dinner ended the evening for everyone, with me sent to my room and the meal cleared away. Anything below the top of the class meant a weekend indoors, and a lecture I could recite from memory by the time I was 12. He never raised me so much as inspected me, always looking for the next thing to correct, always keeping the tally fresh. Every mistake had its punishment ready before I had finished making it. A chore tripled, a door locked, a month of silence at the dinner table. Praise was a thing other kids got, and I learned not to expect it. By the time I was grown, I flinched at the sound of his car in the driveway, though I could not have named the last kind word he gave me. There were nights I would lie awake running through the day, cataloging what I had done, trying to spot the thing I was going to be punished for before it found me. By the time I was old enough to leave, I had already been leaving in my head for years, packing in slow increments, counting the months. The day I moved out, he reminded me that everything I owned he had paid for, and told me to remember it. There was no goodbye worth the name, just a final tally and a closed door. Leaving felt like stepping out of a cold house into the sun. I built a quiet life a few towns over, the kind where no one kept score of my mistakes. Years into it, I met Owen, and through Owen, I met his father, Walt. Owen was easy in a way I had to learn from, raised by people who corrected gently and forgave fast. Walt shook my hand the first time like I was already someone worth knowing, and by the second visit, he was saving me the good chair. Conversations with him went somewhere, and he remembered what I had said the week before. Walt's house was the first place I ever sat down without checking what I might be doing wrong. When I got something wrong in his cooking area, burned the rice, or dropped a dish, he laughed it off and showed me again without a word about it. He never logged it. He never brought it up again. He was not keeping a file on me. Walt asked questions about my work and actually remembered the answers. When I was anxious, he noticed without making it a thing. He was the first person in my life who made me feel like being known was safe. Walt did in a year more fathering than my father had managed in a whole childhood, and I had enough sense to let it happen even when it felt strange to receive. My own father stayed where he had always been, distant and exact, calling on holidays to ask what I had accomplished lately. Anything short of remarkable got a sigh and a change of subject, and he skipped my graduation because showing up for the bare minimum, he said, only taught people to expect applause. Owen watched the two of them with me once, and quietly said that some men are fathers by paperwork, and some by choice. For years, that was the shape of it. Walt close and warm, my father far and cold, and me slowly learning the difference between what I had been given and what I had been owed. When Owen proposed, the wedding became the first thing in my life my father took a real interest in. He called to say he assumed he would be walking me down the aisle, the way fathers do, and that he had already bought the suit. I had not asked him. The guest list, the church, the date, all of it he treated as things he was entitled to approve. Now, he wanted the head table seat and a few minutes to speak, since the father of the bride sets the tone. He wanted the band to learn a specific song, and the seating chart arranged around him. And when I mentioned that Walt had been more of a father to me lately, he went quiet, then cold, then told me not to be childish. He had fed me and housed me and made me strong, he said, and a daughter does not hand her wedding to some other family's man. Strong was the word he kept using, as if every punishment had been a gift I was too slow to thank him for. He brought up the suit again, and the cost of it, as though buying clothes for a role no one offered him made the role his. Then the calls came nightly. He wanted to know the order of the procession, where he would stand, which song would play as he brought me in. My mother, who had watched all of it for 30 years and said nothing, told me to just let him have this one thing. Letting him have things was the family religion, and I had finally stopped praying to it. Not one of them asked how I felt about being walked anywhere by the man I had spent my childhood bracing against. For a few weeks, I let them push and felt the old flinch come back, the one that used to mean give in. The thought of him on my arm in front of everyone, smiling like he had earned it, turned my stomach. What kept circling back was a simple question, namely who had actually walked beside me when it counted. Walt had, every time, without once keeping score. So I drove out to Walt's place one evening and asked him just one question. We sat at his dining table, the one with the wobbly leg he kept saying he would fix, and I looked at him and said, Walt, would you walk me down the aisle? I told him the rest of it too, that he had been more of a father to me than my own had ever figured out how to be, and that I did not want to walk toward my future on the arm of someone who only ever made me feel small. I said I wanted that walk to mean something real, and it could only mean something real if he was the one beside me. Walt did not answer right away. He sat there with his hands flat on the table and his mouth pressed shut, and for a long time the only sound was the clock on his wall. Then his eyes got wet, and he looked down at his hands like he was trying to get hold of himself. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick. You don't have to do that for me, he said. I don't need a title. I told him it was not about a title. It was about the truth. And the truth was that he had earned that walk every single time he laughed off a burned pot of rice, or saved me the good chair, or remembered what I said the week before. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly and said, then I'd be proud to. I heard a sound behind me and turned to see Owen standing in the doorway. His eyes were red and he was smiling in that way he does when he is trying not to fall apart. He crossed the room in 2 steps and wrapped his arms around both of us, and for a few seconds nobody said anything because nothing needed to be said. It felt settled. It felt right. The next day I called Gregoryson. I kept it simple and direct. I've asked Walt to walk me down the aisle. I said, I want you there as a guest, but the walk is Walt's. There was a long silence. Not the kind that comes from someone thinking, the kind that comes from someone deciding how hard to hit back. You're replacing me with a stranger, he said. His voice was flat, like he was reading a fact off a page. I told him Walt was not a stranger. I told him Walt had been there, really there, in ways that mattered. I paid for your childhood, he said. I kept you fed. I kept a roof over you, and this is what I get. I had heard some version of that speech my whole life. The long list of things he spent on me, held over me like receipts I was supposed to keep thanking him for. You kept score, Dad, I said. That's different from keeping me safe. He hung up without another word. Within an hour, my phone rang again. My mother's voice had that careful, pleading tone I had heard 1,000 times growing up. Your father is devastated, she said. He's sitting in his chair and he won't speak. Can't you just let him have this? It's one walk. It's 2 minutes. I leaned against the counter. 2 minutes. She made it sound so small, like it cost nothing. But that was always how it worked with them. Every time I gave in, it was supposed to be a small thing. 2 minutes here, a weekend there, A lifetime of handing over pieces of myself so Gregoryson could feel like a father without ever doing the work of being one. You've been asking me to give him things my whole life, I told her. I'm done. She got quiet. Then she said something that landed harder than anything Gregoryson had thrown at me. He's not perfect, but he's the only father you have. I took a breath and said, no, Mom, he's not. We hung up and I stood there for a long time, not moving, just letting the quiet fill the space where their voices had been. 3 days later, there was a knock at my door. Owen was at work, and when I opened it, Gregoryson was standing there in the suit, the wedding suit, the one he kept bringing up, the one he bought without being asked. He said, try telling me to my face. I stepped aside and let him in. He sat down on the couch like he owned the place and started talking the way he always did, like a lawyer giving a closing argument. He listed every bill, every grocery run, every year he worked to keep the lights on and food on the table. He talked about school supplies and winter coats, and the car he helped me buy when I turned 16. He laid it all out like evidence, and the whole time his voice never rose. It stayed level and controlled, the way it always did when he thought he was winning. When he was done, I said, knowing someone and caring for them are not the same thing, Dad. Something moved behind his eyes, fast and sharp, and then it was gone. He said he had made me tough, that the world would have eaten me alive without him, that Walt's kindness was soft and would never have kept me standing. I looked at him and said, you gave me nightmares about spilled glasses of water. His jaw tightened. Then he stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked out without another word. The next week, my phone filled with calls from cousins and aunts I had not heard from in years, all of them reading the same script Gregoryson had handed them. None of them asked why I had made the choice I made. None of them asked what it had been like growing up in his house. They just called to tell me I was wrong, the same way he always did, and the pressure built from every direction until it felt like the walls were closing in. It was the same feeling I had as a kid. Everyone lined up on his side and not a single person wondering what I had been through to get here. I called Presley. She was my closest friend, and the only person outside of Owen who knew the full truth of what growing up with Gregoryson had been like. I told her everything, the visit, the suit, the phone calls, all of it. Presley listened the way she always did, quiet and steady, and when I was done she said, he's doing the same thing he always did. He's making you the problem so no one looks at him. Then she said, stop answering the phone. You already made your choice. Now protect it. I did. That night I lay in bed next to Owen staring at the ceiling, and the whole thing started to unravel in my head. Owen must have felt me thinking because he rolled over and looked at me. What's wrong? He asked. I told him the truth, that I was scared I was making a mistake, that maybe I was being too hard, that maybe 2 minutes really was just 2 minutes, and I was turning it into something bigger than it needed to be. He was quiet for a second, and then he said, you're not punishing him. You're choosing someone who chose you. There's a difference. I knew he was right, but knowing something in your head and feeling it in your chest are two different things. I lay there listening to Owen breathe and thought about the walk, the aisle, what it would mean to look up and see Walt beside me instead of Gregoryson. The image steadied me more than anything else I had tried. Owen and I had made the decision together not to invite Gregoryson to the rehearsal dinner, only to the wedding itself. The rehearsal was supposed to be the easy part, a chance to walk through everything with the people actually in our corner. We picked a restaurant downtown with a private room in the back, and for the first hour, it was exactly what I needed. Walt was already seated when we arrived, comfortable in a button-down with his sleeves rolled up, chatting with one of Owen's cousins like he had known her for years. Presley was across the table making everyone laugh. The food was coming out, and I was starting to feel something close to normal. Then the door opened. I heard the room go quiet, the way a room does when something walks in that does not belong. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. I turned, and there he was, Gregoryson, standing in the doorway in that suit, the one he wore to my door, the one that had become less a piece of clothing and more a statement. He wore it like armor. Behind him was Sue, trailing a step back with her eyes fixed on the floor and her purse clutched in both hands. Owen moved before I could think, stepping close so our arms touched. Across the room, Walt set down his napkin slowly, placed both hands flat on the table, and watched. He did not stand. He did not speak. He just watched. Gregoryson walked straight toward me, past the table full of people, past Presley, past Walt, and stopped in front of me, and his voice cracked. I came because I need you to hear something, he said. The room was so quiet I could hear ice settling in someone's water glass. He looked at me, his eyes red, and said, when I was young, your grandmother Narissa danced with me at my sister's wedding. She held me and told me that one day I would dance with my own daughter. I have waited my whole life for that. His voice broke on the last word. Behind him, Sue pressed her hand over her mouth. The room was completely still. I could feel the old pull, the one that had kept me giving in for years, the one that whispered, just say yes, just make it stop. And then I saw it. It was small, just a flicker, but I caught it. His eyes moved. They slid to the left, just for a second, scanning the faces at the table, checking who was watching, then to the right, checking again. His voice, the one that had cracked so perfectly, was pitched at exactly the right volume for every person at that table to hear every word. And the way he was standing, angled so the whole room could see his face, so everyone could watch the tears, so no one would miss the performance. He had chosen this moment on purpose. He knew I had not invited him. He came anyway, because he knew that in front of all these people I would be softer. He had figured out the conditions where I was most likely to fold and set everything up so that saying no would make me look heartless in front of everyone I cared about. It was the same thing he had done my entire life. The board was set, the pieces were placed, and I was supposed to make the only move that would not make me look like the villain. Owen saw it too. I felt his hand tighten around mine, one firm squeeze, and I knew he had caught the same thing I had. I took a breath. Dad, I said, and my voice was steadier than I expected. I love that memory of you and Grandma Narissa. I do. I meant it. The image of her holding him, telling him he would dance with his daughter someday. That was real, and it deserved to be honored, but not like this. But you didn't come here to share it with me, I said. You came here to share it with them. I gestured at the room, at the table full of people staring at us, at Presley whose face was tight with anger she was holding back, at Walt who had not moved an inch. Because you knew I'd have a harder time saying no with everyone watching. That's what you've always done. You set up the board so I can't move without looking like the bad guy. The shift was instant. The softness drained from Gregoryson's face. His jaw set. The trembling chin went still. His eyes went flat and hard, and the man in front of me was not the grieving father anymore. He was the same man who had locked my door and cleared the dinner table and kept count of every glass I ever spilled. You are going to regret this, he said quietly. Sue reached for his arm. He shook her off, turned on his heel, and walked out. The door closed and the room stayed silent. 5 seconds. 10. Then Walt pushed his chair back, stood up, looked around the table with the calmest face I had ever seen on a person, and said, all right, who wants dessert? A few people let out shaky laughs. The tension cracked. Not all the way, but enough for people to start breathing again. Enough for forks to move and voices to come back. The wedding morning came in soft and quiet. I was in the bridal suite with Presley when someone slid a folded note under the door. It was Owen's handwriting, a little shaky. Walt has been ready since 6 a.m. He ironed his shirt 3 times. I laughed, and then the laugh turned into something else, and I was blinking hard hard trying not to ruin the makeup that had just been finished. Presley squeezed my shoulders and said, "That man adores you. Go let him prove it." I found Walt in the hallway outside the ceremony doors. He was wearing a simple dark suit, nothing flashy, just clean and pressed and right. His hands were clasped in front of him, and he was standing very still, like he had been waiting there a long time and would have waited longer. When he saw me, he pressed his lips together and blinked a few times, fighting to hold himself together. "Well, look at you," he said, voice rough at the edges. "Thank you for doing this," I said. He shook his head before I finished the sentence. "You don't thank someone for the honor of their life," he said. He offered his arm and I took it, and for the first time on a wedding day, I did not feel afraid. The doors opened, the music started. Every row of chairs was full, the room bright and warm and full of faces turned toward me. I saw Owen at the end of the aisle already wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. I saw Presley at the front with her chin up and her eyes shining. I saw Sue in the third row, hands folded in her lap, looking down. And I saw Gregorison, seated on the aisle in the second row, in the suit he had bought months ago, the same one he wore to my door, the same one he wore to the rehearsal dinner, his posture rigid, his face unreadable. Walt and I began to walk. His pace was steady and unhurried, like he had nowhere else in the world to be. Halfway down the aisle, his hand moved and covered mine where it rested on his arm, and he gave one small squeeze. I felt something I had never felt standing next to a father figure. Safe, not inspected, not graded, not measured against some list of things I should be doing better, just held. The kind of held that asks nothing back and keeps no record of the cost. As we passed Gregorison's row, I looked at him, not with anger, not with triumph. I just looked, and for 1 second our eyes met. His chin was trembling. His hands were gripping his knees so hard I could see the knuckles going white. He was watching the moment he had always assumed was his being given to someone else, and there was nothing he could do about it. He had spent 30 years making me small so he could feel large, and now the room full of people who were supposed to witness his moment were watching someone else walk me home. He did not cause a scene. He did not stand. He sat in his expensive suit and watched. That was the whole punishment. He had to watch. Walt delivered me to Owen at the altar, shook Owen's hand firmly, then turned to me and said quietly, "You turned out good, kid. And that's got nothing to do with me and everything to do with you." I hugged him. The sound that came out of me was something between a laugh and a sob, and I could not have stopped it if I tried. Half the guests reached for tissues. The vows were exchanged. Owen cried through his, every single word, and I got through mine by gripping his hands so tight my knuckles went white. When the officiant pronounced us married, the room erupted in noise and clapping and cheering, and in the middle of all of it I glanced back at Gregorison's seat. It was empty. Sue was still there, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, but the chair beside her was vacant. He had left sometime during the vows. He watched the walk, the part he wanted, and when it was over and the rest of the ceremony belonged to everyone else, he could not stay. He could not even sit through the whole thing, and that told me everything his words never did. At the reception, Walt danced with me. No special song, no grand gesture, just a slow turn around the floor while Owen watched from the head table with the biggest smile I had ever seen on him. Walt looked at me and said, "You know, I never had a daughter. Always wondered what it would be like." I asked how it was. He said, "Best thing that's ever happened to me." I rested my head on his shoulder and let myself feel the full weight of being chosen by someone who had no obligation to choose me. Later that night, after the cake and the toasts and the last song, I found a voicemail from Gregorison. I listened to it once. His voice was flat. "You made your point." That was all he said. 3 words. No apology, no warmth. Just a final tally, the only language he ever learned. I deleted it, put the phone down, and went back to my husband.